Our Stellar Crown metagame is in full swing, and we recently just had Louisville Regionals that's changed up our metagame a little bit. A few decks have changed their positions, a few lists have been updated, and of course, this is a very great place for you to start learning a little bit more about the metagame, figuring out exactly what are the top decks, and more. I'm Zach Lesage, this is the Shuffle Squad. Give this video a like, and let's jump into our top 10 best decks. Kicking things off, we have Banette EX as our number 10 deck. So this is a deck that I don't think has made our top 10, but it did well in both the Masters Division with Piper Lapine, and it did well in the Juniors, Seniors divisions as well. So I think it's one of those things where we have to kind of put this deck now. And our bottom slots, I think, in this top 10 decks are going to be rotating. If you haven't put your best guesses in the comments below, let us know what you think the top 10 best decks are in order. We do get back to all comments. Additionally, all the lists are available for copy and paste right into PTCG Live in the pinned comment that should be going up within 24 hours of this post. Banette's here to lock some items. You're able to accelerate energies with Gardevoir through your various Pokemon, and there's a handful of different cool things that you can do in this kind of control-esque deck. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the most up to date on playing Banette. Like, it's one of those decks where I could probably play this deck okay. I'm not a master of Banette, so it's one of those things where you might not see too many of these decks, but it is becoming more and more well positioned with the decks in format. No one's really preparing against this deck, and typically that's where control decks lie into the metagame. So I think I used Piper's build for this. There's Mateus's list out from Poland. They did very well, I believe, the Dortmund regionals. So there's a lot of resources available for this deck, but right now I think this is the one that we kind of go with, locking your opponent out of play, going with some cool Monkey Dory plays, and of course that item lock. So kicking it off, let's jump into our number 9 deck. Again on this list this week, we have Gango EX. I think Gango EX is one of those decks that's ready to break into this format, has a great matchup against a lot of decks, such as Raging Bolt, especially now that they're playing Bravery Charms, Charizard. There's a handful of different decks that you're playing. So as long as you're able to get set up with Gango EX, you're going to be ripping energies from your hand and making it rain. We also have the Palkia V-Star lineup. So we're able to go Palkia V-Star, get some of those energies you discarded, and get them back on to play with the Radiant Greninja, kind of spreading some damage, turning a single prize card Pokemon, being able to draw 2 prize cards. You may be using Palkia as an additional attacker if you need to, but reasonably putting our opponent in a tough situation across the board. I think Gango is one of those decks that does not necessarily get enough love in our format, and really has the opportunity to see a lot of success. So if you're looking for kind of a roguer pick, or a deck that's the path that's lesser traveled than most, I think Gango is incredibly well positioned to this metagame. Sure, you might run into some consistency issues, because I think a deck like this is interesting. You're running off of a Code Breaker's kind of solution, or Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, whatever it's called. It's a card that's not really used to the point where I don't know what the supporters called off the top of my head. We're using that as an engine and using coin bonus to draw extra cards. So it's not as tested as a deck that's like playing Professor's Research, Iono stuff. It's a new kind of engine, but regardless, it has seen results. We did have Jelly Van Kampen top cut that regionals in Dortmund, and I really think Gango has what it takes to go on even more. Here we have Thorns EX coming in at number 8. It's the deck that won our World Championships, and again, we're going to be going through, I believe, Cal Connor's list that won a late night, or did very well at a late night. Going with more of an energy denial build, going enhanced hammers over those Pokemon catchers. Now, we have seen a few players play Thorns at regionals and special events. They've done pretty well. Nothing that's gone super deep, but I do think Thorns is really one of those decks where you just hit the right matchups or not and find yourself in a really good position of being like, yep, I hit a deck that plays a lot of abilities. They don't really have an answer. We got a Crushing Hammerheads. The game should be relatively easy at that point. I think if you're really unsure on the Friday night of a regionals, and if there's nothing else that you want to be playing, this is a really good deck to be playing. Like, it's one of those things where if you're playing matchup roulette to some degree, but regardless of what people think, I think this deck does have a little bit more skill expression than most people give it credit for, because when you have minimal actions, your actions are typically weighted more. So even just choosing the different Pokemon to knock out, I see so many players choosing the wrong Pokemon with Pokemon catchers or boss's orders, bring up the wrong Pokemon, discarding the wrong energies, not playing Lost City, not attaching or managing their energies correctly, choosing the wrong supporters. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do wrong when you're playing this deck, and it just shows how brilliant this deck can be when you play it correctly. If you're needing any of the cards for these decks, this deck or any of the other decks on this list, check out our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards and PTCGL Store. Additionally, we use Ultimate Guard products here at the Shuffle Squad. You can see all those katanas I got back there. One of those things, if you're looking to kind of have that supreme shuffle feeling, check out Ultimate Guard website, see what their offerings are, or your local game store that might have them in stock. Let's jump into our number 7 pick. Dragapult EX is one of those decks that did not do very well in Louisville this past weekend, and it's kind of surprising because I felt, as a player that just played in the Lima special event, Dragapult was everywhere. The list that I'm showcasing here is Nicholas Galaz. He made top 4 at that Lima special event, and I thought Dragapult seemed like a very good answer to the metagame. Maybe players were just trying to play more consistent decks, or maybe trying to play something, maybe they were worried about Dragapult in the metagame. Overall, we kind of let Lost Zone Box sneak through the cracks. And I also, maybe it's because Raging Bolt's everywhere. That's a pretty tough matchup. So while I can't necessarily recommend this deck right off the hop, because Raging Bolt should just be able to overcome it, hitting that big number, knocking out that stage 2 Pokemon EX, this deck certainly has enough tricks up its sleeve between Dusknoir and of course using Phantom Dive to take multiple prize cards at once. I do like the inclusion of Mela and Crispin in this deck to have some different energy acceleration. So it works overall. I really don't dislike anything about this list. So I go with Nicholas. He's actually the player that beat me to advance to the top 8, whereas I made top 16. Maybe I'm biased in that front where I'm like, gotta root for my opponent, but overall I thought his list was fantastic, watching it play out against me as well. So if you're looking for Dragapult, this is probably where I'd be at. But we still got a long list ahead. We're kind of getting to the point where we're at the staple 6 decks or so that I'd say. Any point on going forward, I feel most of those decks are a really good choice regardless of whatever the metagame is. We're in a really wide metagame across the board, so any of these decks, fantastic choices, but especially the top 6 in format. I think you can't really go wrong with any of them. Here we have Charizard EX at number 6. We saw Charizard break into the top 8 of Louisville. We had Sebastian Lashmit, fantastic player, running this deck. I think it was until the top 4. Not entirely sure what took them out, but in terms of just like a standard Charizard build, I really like that their build seemed pretty consistent, pretty straight up. Was probably only 2 cards off from the stock build that I've been kind of showcasing, whereas the only change I believe was adding a Mist Energy and a Cleffa over an Iono, and one other card that I don't necessarily remember that we had in this deck. I think we might want to look into adding a Lost Vacuum, just with all the Bravery Charms that we saw in the Raging Bolt decks in both Caleb Gadamer and Xander Perot's. So that might be something that we add into the deck over Mist Energy, maybe, or over the Cleffa. But I think Charizard is pretty figured out at this point, going with that even thinner than normal Charizard line, the 2-1-3 line of Charizard. It's probably as thin as you can go, just to make sure that we have space for all these extra tech cards that we have. I want to see like all the Charizard players, if they've been able to pull off Briar. It's a card that like I think is really cool in the deck and especially powerful with Dusknoir, but doesn't necessarily always come out every single game. Might be a potential cuttable card for the Lost Vacuum, but I think Briar is one of those cards it's too good not to include for the games that you do use it. What do you think? Do you think Charizard should be a little bit higher on this list, or do you think number 6 is appropriately placed? I know there's a lot of Charizard fans and there's a lot of Charizard haters on the Shuffle Squad, so let us know what you think. But otherwise, yeah, I think this list is fantastic. We're about to enter into the top 5. Let's jump into it. Jumping into our number 5 pick, we have Regid Dragovar V-Star. The build that I'm including here is a little bit different than most other builds. I'm going with the Noivern Scoop Up Cyclone kind of strategy that I saw from Marco Cifuentes from the Lima special event. So I'm very heavily inspired by my trip to that tournament and some of my deck lists. We have seen a lot of other players play a more traditional build where they're using the spot maybe for the Noivern and going for more of a Noctowl line. A lot of the top players went for 2/2 Noctowls this past weekend. I do like the idea of using Noivern, Temple of Sinnoh to use the second attack to lock Terrapagos out of the game, and potentially locking Raging Bolt EX out of the game, and some other basic Pokemon attacking decks with Scoop Up Cyclone, Professor Turo Scenario. So the big gameplay there is to use Noctowl, search out Turo, and Scoop Up Cyclone, using Scoop Up Cyclone Turo to clear your bench, then using the Regid Dragovar V-Star's ability, getting back that Scoop Up Cyclone and maybe the Temple of Sinnoh, being able to lift up another Pokemon and leaving yourself with only the Regid Dragovar V-Star, copying that Noivern EX attack to use Covert Flight against the Raging Bolt. I like the option in the deck, and it's something that I think we're probably going to see a little bit more of going forward if people decide to kind of experiment with Regid Dragovar. It's a really cool build, but we might be able to cut some other cards like the Turo and the Noivern for another Noctowl line, and switching Scoop Up Cyclone for a Prime Catcher to make it pretty much a normal list. Maybe finding some room for Radiant Charizard and extra fire, but again, lists are getting tight with all the cards that you need to play in them. Our number 4 pick is going to be Stefan Ivanov's Palkia V-Star, Dusknoir, and Greninja deck that we've seen kind of pop off since his run in Dortmund. At first, I didn't necessarily understand this deck, but it's kind of like a more spread bridge based approach of the Terrapagos deck. So I'm really excited to see how this deck continuously goes through the metagame, because right now being able to use Palkia V-Star, loading up energies on either Froakie or Radiant Greninja, then going into Rare Candy Greninja, taking multiple prize cards, using Dusknoir to further layer that. I think there's just so many cool things you can do, and I think we saw a lot of top players playing this deck this past weekend. Alex Szymanski, Ian Robb, just to name a couple. I believe the deck ended up making top 4 with Kyle L. I can go with L. Tough last name for me to pronounce. Lesnuix, if I could pronounce it, we'll try, but I could be butchering that as well. Regardless, we've seen a lot of top placements. We've seen a lot of top players playing this deck. So if you have been a Palkia believer for a minute, I think Palkia is one of those more skill-based decks in our format that might take some time to learn. Like any other deck, with Dusknoir, it can kind of crash and burn early. I feel like there's a lot of just like rare candy, Duskull pieces that you could kind of have that can kind of clutter your hand, but otherwise, if you're able to get set up, this is a really, really cool deck across the board, and it's a deck that I'm personally going to put a lot of effort into before the Latin American International Championships. We might even see it doing well at Lille and Gdansk regionals before that as well. Lugia V-Star making the top 3, and I think Lugia is really one of those decks where, similar to Iron Thorns, if you just don't know what you want to be playing for any particular regionals, this is a deck that I would just default on, because it's so powerful. It's relatively easy to play. You're just trying to get those Archeops in your discard pile, loading up some energies with those Archeops, summoning them back with the Lugia V-Star, and attacking. I do believe this is Kieran Farah's build, fellow Canadian, absolutely rocking this season, coming second place in Baltimore, and now coming top 8 in Louisville. We've also seen Yurko from South America. They won a regionals, and of course making top 8 at Louisville as well. Rahul's gone on that tear. Lugia's just allowed so many players to have these deep runs in the tournament. So if your Lugia deck is just seeing success, it's probably a really good deck to play. Nothing wrong with it at all. So I'd recommend playing Lugia V-Star if you haven't necessarily tried it yet, or if you haven't, like, really just a great deck. There's nothing that you could say anything against this. Sure, is it a little linear at times, but between just attaching energies correctly, managing your resources, choosing the right attacker, there's a lot of different decisions that you can be making that are better than your opponents. And if Lugia is just going to be easy to get set up and you have all those things going for you, 100% recommend playing this deck going forward. So we're at our top 3. What do you think our decks are going to be in the top 2? I have a pretty good guess. I mean, I'm the one that created this list, and it's based off of results from major events. But I'd love to hear what your guesses are on the top 2. Sure, we're going to hear some great comments from that as well. And if you haven't given this video a like yet, what are you doing? You've already watched probably 20 minutes of content, so we really appreciate the like on the video. It does help boost the YouTube algorithm, alongside giving this video some commentary, just letting us know in the comments what you think really helps out. Alongside it, double check to see if you subscribed. If you have another YouTube account, see if you can subscribe with that as well. just getting so close to that 25K subscribers. It would be fantastic to achieve that. Let's jump into that number 2 pick. Trapos EX is at number 2. Trapos EX has had a kind of great reception with a lot of top players. We had it doing well at pretty much all the post Stellar Crown events. I know that I made top 16 with it. In Lima, it won the Lima special events. And most recently, we had Gabriel Smart making top 8 with it at the Louisville Regional Championships. Very similar build to what his list was. I think the only change that I made from his list was cutting a Vitality Band for a Lost Vacuum, which I think could be very helpful towards all the Raging Bolt with Bravery Charms that we've seen. I think it was already only 1 card off or 2 cards off from where my list was at Lima special events. I had a Jet Energy and I had... I think I just had a Jet Energy for Vitality Band, and I think that was the only difference. So I think a lot of the Trapos decks are now getting fully well discovered. I still need to find my optimal Hoot Hoots. Now that I don't play Jet Energy, you can kind of look at your opponent's hand with that Hoot Hoots. So it's kind of like the Duskull debate. It has the 2 difficult to find arts. Not really worthwhile for the Hoot Hoots and Duskulls, but it's better to always play the slightly better attacks or slightly better reasonings or anything else like that. Probably could dive into that on a whole other day, but right now, Trapos EX, I think it's incredibly powerful. It's one of the only few decks that has a pretty neutral matchup spread across almost any deck, but it usually can win games very quickly on turn 3 with that Dust Noir. So very similar to the Palkia deck or any other Dust Noir deck where you could kind of, you win the game with 2 attacks and Dust Noir can really take care of the rest, but this deck can use Briar, which I think gives it a slight edge on top of having that Fan Rotom, Noctowl, Pidgeot kind of movement, making this deck a little bit more consistent. But this is our number 2 deck, not our number 1 deck. I'm sure you've already all guessed it by now, but our number 1 deck of the week is Raging Bolt EX. Takes the top spot, especially after coming 2nd place at the Lima special events. Caleb Gettimer takes it all the way to a 1st place finish at the Louisville Regional Championships. And the build that I have here seems pretty good across the board. We saw both Caleb Gettimer and Xander Perot go with more Bravery Charms than usual. Most decks would play 0 to 2, and now we're seeing 3 to 4 copies, really. And I think the biggest moment that we saw was on stream of Xander Perot against Ian Robb, where Xander made it impossible for Ian to knock out any of his Pokemon without Lost Vacuum. So I think one thing to note here is we might see Jamming Tower spike up and play a little bit. We might see Lost Vacuum spike up and play a little bit just to get around those Bravery Charms. So I think you either want to be running no Bravery Charms or you want to be running that kind of 3 to 4 counts when it comes to this deck. So I like how this deck plays out. I think this is a very good build of the deck. I've edited Gettimer's list a little bit. I don't know if I needed three switch card or not, but it's one of those things where if you don't want to be playing this list, we do have a regional champion with it, and Caleb Gettimer is one of the best players in the world of all time, so he knows what he's doing with that deck. Raging Bolts, our top deck. I don't think I would have ever thought of it otherwise, but it is our top deck this week. Let me know, do you agree with this deck being the number 1 deck? Do you agree with this list? It is based off results, so if you don't agree with this list, it's based off previous results at major events. But if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, would love to kind of have a conversation in the comments. Let me close things out. And that's our list for this week. I think pretty much like I said, any of the top 6 decks are almost staples. If you like one of those decks more than the rest, you've been grinding them for a minute, I would 100% recommend playing those decks. If you're trying to pick a deck that's not currently within the top 6, you probably want to have a reason metagame-wise. But pretty much any deck in the top 10 is more than acceptable to be playing at this point. You could go for a deeper cut when it comes to something like Cloth, Gardevoir, but just make sure you have a reason for it, because if you're not prepared to tackle on the top 6, which we're almost always going to see those decks within the top 16 plus of a regionals, at least day 2, I think we're going to see all of those top 6 decks well represented. You might want to make sure, like from a competitive standpoint, that you're making the right choice for your deck. Other than that, I appreciate everyone tuning into this video. I'd totally love to help some more players get ready on their Pokemon journey. So if you're trying to If you're trying to get better at Pokemon, hit me up for some coaching on Metafy. Love to get you to where you want to be, whether it's winning a League Challenge, League Cup, making that first day 2, any of the above totally can help you get there. I've helped out a lot of players. Been playing the game for over 20 years now, and it's one of those things where I continuously play the game at a top level. Being said, I will catch up with all y'all later. Peace out and have a great day. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.